Well, it does look like we have a good group, so we're going to go ahead and make the most of everyone's time and get started here. Give me just a moment. So welcome, good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's forum event, From Pen to Bookshelf, Understanding the World of Publishing. We are very excited to have with us a panel of experts from the industry who will share an inside business with us shortly. My name is Amanda McCarthy, and I'm the Assistant Director of Communications and Engagement. And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone of housekeeping items. If you could all just take a moment to put your full name and class year into the chat so we know you're a tonight, that would be very helpful. Please go ahead and mute your microphone if you haven't already. If you're not speaking during the event, this just helps us minimize the background noise. And if you have questions throughout the event, feel free to enter them into the chat and we'll make sure we get to them in the Q&A portion of the event. And finally, please note that this session is being recorded so that we can share it with those who might not be able to join us tonight. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator. Amy Elizabeth Bishop is a 2015 graduate of SUNY Geneseo, where she was a creative writing major with a minor in German. Amy currently serves as a literary agent at Distel, Goderich, and Barrett, where she cultivates a wide-ranging list of literary and upmarket fiction, driven narrative nonfiction, and select young adult with a special interest in BIPOC voices. Her list includes titles such as The Last Story of Minna Lee by Nancy Ju-Yoon Kim, which was a Reese's Book Club selection and a New York Times bestseller. The Silence of Bones by June Her, which was a Junior Library Guild selection, and Living by Shannon Dingle, which is coming summer 2021. Amy bringing together an expert group to discuss the publishing process, explain what they do on a basis, and share how they got into the industry. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you to welcome tonight's panelists.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And thank you and Michelle and the whole alumni team for hosting us tonight virtually and to help coordinate this event. It's something that I know I've talked about with other alumni who are actually on this panel about putting together for a few years. And it's my great pleasure to welcome tonight's incredible panelists, who I'm lucky to say are both friends and colleagues. So Leora Bernstein is an alum of Geneseo 2010, where she was a musical theater major with a minor in piano pedagogy. She went on to get her MFA at the Boston Conservatory and did theater for exactly 1 year before deciding to transition into a career in publishing. She is currently a national accounts manager selling to distributors and libraries for Simon & Schuster. Prior to that, she sold to the independent bookstores in the Southeast United States for Simon & Schuster. And before joining Simon's sales force, she was in sales at Macmillan, in editorial at HarperCollins, and in Simon & Schuster's managing editorial department. She is an alum of the Columbia Publishing course, class of 2014, is the co-founder of Simon & Schuster's employee-run book club, Books and Bites, and is a consulting member of the company book club S&S Reads Together. Welcome, Leora. Natalie Hallak is an associate editor at Park Row Books. Prior to joining Harlequin HarperCollins in 2015, Natalie honed her editorial skills during internships at Simon & Schuster, Putnam, part of Penguin Random House, and Writers House Literary Agency. She publishes literary fiction with commercial appeal across a variety of genres, as well as select narrative nonfiction. Her list includes titles such as The Last Story of Minna Lee by Nancy Ju-Yoon Kim, which is a Reese's Book Club selection and New York Times bestseller, The Bookshop of Yesterdays by Amy Meyerson, a national bestseller, and The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, which is forthcoming in March of 2021. Thank you, Natalie, for being here. Bibi Lewis is an associate agent at the Ethan Ellenberg Literary Agency. Bibi is an alum of Geneseo, class of 2014, where she was an English major with a women and gender studies minor. She has been at the Ethan Ellenberg Literary Agency since 2014. She began by assisting and managing foreign and subsidiary rights and became the office manager shortly after. Bibi is currently building her list as an agent and represents both children and adult titles. A lifelong New Yorker, Bibi can usually be found knitting on the subway, at least pre-COVID. Thanks, Bibi. And Hannah Rody-Wright is an associate manager for subsidiary rights at the Jane Rothrosen Agency. Hannah is an alum of Geneseo, class of 2015, where she majored in theater and English. Hannah worked in several independent bookstores before making her way to Jane Rosen in early 2017 as the agency's office administrator. Having the opportunity to move into the sub-rights department has been fortuitous, as it marries Hannah's literary interests and sales experience with her love of travel and interest in other cultures. Handling submissions, negotiating deals, and working closely with co-agents and foreign publishers all over the world, Hannah enjoys nothing more than finding new opportunities for JRA's authors. Thanks for being here, Hannah. And Casey Sears is a production manager at Penguin Random House. Casey is an alum of Geneseo, class of 2012, where she was an English major with a business studies minor. She started at Penguin Random House in 2016 as a production assistant and is now a production manager at Penguin Random House. She originally hails from Weedsport, New York, lived in New York City from 2013 to 2020, and just recently relocated to Madison, Wisconsin, where she lives with her partner, a fellow Geneseo grad, and now office mate, while they're both working from home. Please welcome our panelists. So I have a few questions of my own for them, but we will be opening it up to Q&A at the end, as Amanda said. So if you have questions for us, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can by the end. So I'd like to start off today by asking each of you about the paths that you took to publishing and how your background influenced or didn't influence where you are today.
I'll go first. So I graduated from Geneseo in 2010, which was during the recession. And so I went to grad school for musical theater. And I kind of followed that pipeline of like school to school. And then when I kind of plopped out on the other side to be an actress, I realized, wow, this is really not for me. I wanted like a 9-to-5. I wanted to wear more than just dance clothes, although now we're working from home, so I'm just back to wearing dance clothes. And I don't know, I really wanted to be more involved in stories, and I really loved reading. And so I asked every single person that I knew about publishing. And eventually I ran into the right person, and they talked to me about an internship at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. So I was in the children's franchise department there. And after that, I asked them, how do I get like a job, like a real job, like a paying one with benefits? And they're like, well, you should do the Columbia Publishing course. It's a pretty good way of getting yourself to know 100 other people your age who are all finding jobs, and it's a really good networking opportunity. And I was like, great. So I did that, back to school for like 6 weeks. It wasn't like school. And after that, I got a job at a bookstore. I was a Scholastic bookstore associate. And then I got another internship. And then finally, in November of 2014, I was given my first opportunity in a publishing house. Luckily, I was able to work in a Big Five, Simon & Schuster. And I've just never looked back. There's a much longer story that involves how I moved from man-ed to editorial to sales. But long story short is I, much like many people who want to go into publishing, thought that editorial was publishing. Like there was only one route. I thought that if you liked books, then you should do editorial or agenting, or either one, just you have to be with the books. And I kind of realized as I went through that path that it's about how you think about books. So when I talk to editors, they're always talking about how plots could be better in this way and characters could be more developed in this way. And the same thing with my agent friends. And I very much was always like, yeah, but weren't you excited about it? Like, let's talk about why everyone needs to read this book. And I kind of discovered that I am the storyteller of publishing. I am telling you the story about why you should read the story. And that really fit me, kind of probably because of my performing arts past. To be completely honest, the skills that I got at Geneseo, I learned about self-reliance at Geneseo. I learned about problem solving. I learned about performing in front of a group of people who really don't care about you, especially during MTC. And honestly, like those skills have really worked out well for me. I find that I'm pretty good at public speaking, especially considering that a lot of my colleagues don't have those skills or those experiences. So it's my long story short.
I love what you said about it, like where you end up, it kind of shows what you think about books or how you think about books. especially when I think we all kind of had the idea going into it that editorial is publishing. And I had always, when I was at Geneseo, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had an idea about publishing. I knew I liked books and I liked English, but editorial never quite felt right to me, and I wasn't sure how to pursue that path. So when I graduated in 2012, I worked at a community college in an office for a little while, and then I moved to New York City in 2013, where I was working in production at a sleepwear and intimates company, which was completely new to me all the way around. The job came to me from someone I had met who knew someone in the company, and I did a cold call, and that was how I got in there, which was very strange. But I worked there in production for 2.5 years, and I had kind of honed my skills, which was very scary at the beginning. I felt like I had no idea what I was doing, but after a couple of years, I kind of felt like I have a knack for this. I can keep things organized. And I think production is a kind of job you don't really know exists until you have it. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have the skills and could go for something like this if they knew just being organized and keeping something on track through the end of the book. So at the end of my 2.5 years working in intimates, I thought I wasn't really passionate about the product I was working on, and I had actually met with Amy and Bibi, and I'd heard about their work in being agents and working with books, and I thought that sounded so amazing. And I kind of thought to myself, I can do production work. I wonder if books need that also. And I just saw, and turns out they did. And I found an opening at the Penguin side of Penguin Random House in 2016, and I'm still here today.
Casey, we've had such weirdly parallel experiences. It should not surprise you that this is also one of them. I too worked in a sales job that had nothing to do with publishing before getting into this. But I graduated from Geneseo in 2015. I had no clue what I was going to do. My previous work experience had been as a camp counselor and then helping to run a day camp. I was a theater person. I thought I was going to do theater. That wound up not really panning out. So then I lived at home for a year and worked in retail 7 days a week, which was a lot of retail. Half the time I was working at an independent bookstore in my hometown. The other half the time I was working at a store selling wedding dresses, which is where I learned, see, this is where it comes back around. This is where I learned a lot about like how to sell stuff to people, because they would tell us in the bridal store, you know, you can't show somebody more than 5 dresses because their eyes will start to glaze over. Everything will blend together. And honestly, I like use that kind of skill work in my current job all the time. Eventually I went to full-time at the bookstore. Eventually I moved to a different independent bookstore in New York. And then I had been at that one for a couple of months when a friend of mine, also a Geneseo grad who also works in publishing, happened to hear that there was an opening in my literary agency for an office assistant. And I just wanted to try something new. I didn't frankly even really understand what the difference was between a literary agency and a publishing house at that time. But I went, and I've now been there for a couple of years, and I've sort of moved through departments there. So I was office assistant, office administrator. I joined the Subsidiary Rights department sometime in 2018, and I've just been there ever since. But I think like all those jobs that I held before, you know, I've never had a job that has not helped me in the thing that I'm currently in. Like, I think that there are always skills you don't realize you're picking up along the way that then suddenly like you're using them every single day. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you can use anything.
Yeah.
Okay, I will type up now. So I was that dork who as a child just always loved books and nothing but books. You know, I tried a whole bunch of other things, but really all I wanted to do all day was sit around and read and talk about books to other people. So in high school, my dad had a friend who's a literary agent, and he was like, you know, hire Bibi to do paperwork and show her what you do. And so I kind of found out that as a job, I could talk about books for a living, and I could hang out and, converse with writers and help them get their books published. I really wanted to be a writer. I'm not very good at it. I wish I was, but I can't. So I was like, you know what? The next best thing is to help other people make their books. So junior year of Geneseo, I was like, okay, I'm going to get an internship in publishing. Sent out a billion applications and I got 1, maybe 2 interviews. But finally I landed where I am now, which is an internship at the Ethan Ellenberg Literary Agency. I was there for a summer. And because I happen to grow up in the city and I live here, anytime I was home for break, I would give him a call and I'd say, hey, do you need some filing done? I just read this fantastic book. Let's talk about it. And I just bugged him until finally, when I was ready to graduate, he was like, you know what? You're pretty persistent. You should work for me because I have this job opening now, which is, the best advice that I have for people is just like, once you find that first connection, just like keep reminding them that you exist, talk to them a lot. So that's how I got the job. And then since then, I started 2 weeks after graduation, and I've been at the same office ever since. I started, assisting, and then I kind of gradually took more and more onto my plate, and it's just kind of stayed there, which you'll hear about in a little bit.
I can pipe up now too, but I totally agree with you, Bibi, about, just kind of like once you have that way in, just keep, like checking in and saying, oh, how are you doing? Let's grab a virtual coffee, that kind of thing. Just taking those chances when they come up really does reward itself. And that's similar to my experience, how I ended up getting my foot in the door. So I did land an editorial. Although my first job was a hybrid position between subsidiary rights and editorial, which is highly unusual at a big publishing house. But let me take a step back. So similar to Bibi as well, like I was a dork and like loved reading, didn't want to do anything else. And I also loved writing. So I was a weird kid. I just like sat and wrote a book at like 12 years old. It was like about these people in high school. I wasn't even in high school yet. It was like definitely like stereotypes that I saw in like Mean Girls. And it was just like a really strange little book. And my mom, being the amazing supportive woman she is, she was like, let's get it published. I was like, published? Like, what is that? And so we just like Googled how to publish a book, and like a self-publishing company came up and we just did it. And as I grew older, writing, my passion for writing faded, but my passion for reading never did. And that experience of kind of bringing a voice to a page and holding that book in your hands and flipping through it and knowing that, this is something material that you've done and had such an impact on, like it just stayed with me. So I actually knew from a really early age that I wanted to go into publishing. So I kind of made a lot of decisions about where I went to school, pushing for publishing internships right from the get-go. Like I was doing all of that right away because I always knew I wanted to be an editor. So I went to St. John's in Queens. So the proximity to New York City really helped me get my foot in the door. And we can talk about that more as kind of like maybe something that's changing with COVID. But, my professors are, were all like constantly publishing, right? Because I was an English literature major. And so a lot of them had to, had to get their research published. So some of them had connections to the publishing industry. I met with alumni who were in publishing. And so, again, I was just kind of like taking those chances as I could and keeping in contact with people. And so I did eventually get my first internship that way. And it was at Simon & Schuster in editorial. I loved it so much. I was like, okay, I need to do this again. And so then I was over at Penguin Random House in editorial. And then the spring semester of my last year in college, I was at Writer's House. So on the literary agency side. And for anyone who doesn't know, like, this might seem basic, but just in case, like the publishing house is who actually like produces the book, right? So like, you know, comes up with the cover and the marketing and publicity plans and the sales force who sells things in, all of these like amazing people who contribute to every part of the process. It takes a whole village to do it. And then literary agencies are really, I mean, literary agents can like explain it better than I can, but they represent authors and their best interests and navigate the publishing process and kind of match make them the author with the perfect editor for their project. So it was really valuable for me to see the literary agency side of the business so that I really could kind of have an informed, you know, kind of scope of, you know, which side did I want to be on. And so I ultimately, I mean, actually, when I graduated, I went for both jobs. Who am I kidding? No, I was like, okay, whichever will give me the job first. But it just so happened that someone that I interned with, or who I interned for, my manager, she moved over to a different imprint, and she was like, oh, the assistant just left. Like, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I'm graduating soon. Can we meet up for coffee? Like, I'd love to, you know, pick your brain and all of that. And she was like, oh, funny that you get in touch at this particular moment. The assistant just left. You should like send me your resume. And it was the kind of thing where it's like, you work so hard to be at the right place at the right time sometimes. So, so it just ended up being that that was my foot in the door, and I ended up getting that job, and it was a hybrid sub-rights editorial position. And then just, this was like 5.5 years ago. So I've just kind of moved up to solely editorial at this point. And yeah, and it's a dream job. Couldn't be happier.
I always think that the way to get a job in publishing is that you need a lot of hustle and a little luck, because without that luck, you're never going to get your foot in the door. And without the hustle, you're never going to prove that you deserve to be there.
It's so true. It's
was
like
once-
just good timing.
I was once told though that like publishing is big enough and welcoming enough that if you want to be there enough, eventually you will be there. And I
That's
like
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of segues nicely into my next question, which is just because there are so many disparate parts of publishing, as like Casey and Leora and everyone was sort of touching on. I wanted people to just walk us through, like, explain a little bit about what people do, because there are so many facets to it. And I know if you're kind of outside of publishing, it's bewildering. I mean, even for people who are in publishing, it's a little bewildering. So I'd love to know what your kind of day-to-days look like and like what your job is, like what do you actually do?
Do we want to go in the same order? Do we want to mess it up? Or, well, I'm already talking. I'm not muting because otherwise you see my hand because I'm on an iPad. Okay, so I am a sales manager. Like I said before, I'm kind of like the storyteller of publishing. At least that's like my own personal thought in my mind. Basically what I do is I act almost as an intermediary. I'm also one of the reasons that self-publishing is not as preferable as publishing through a house, because, gosh, okay. Basically, on a day-to-day basis, I hear about all of these books that my publishing house is publishing, Simon & Schuster, and I will go to my accounts and I will actively tell them about it, and I'll try and work with them to figure out how I can get more books here and whether or not we think that we could do some advertising for this and really get the books out there to the world. My accounts are for libraries is one of the primary ones, and the other one's for independent bookstores. And so it's kind of fun because I get to really think about like what books do I really want to get in libraries and which ones do I think people will really want to take out versus which ones do I think they're going to go to an independent bookstore for. But there's a whole bunch of different people in sales who go to Barnes & Noble, they do Amazon, they do all sorts of things. But so the cool part of my job is that when I present these books, I'm presenting books that I adore to people who I think will adore them. And I get to live inside the audiences for every single different book. For example, there is a book that I'm obsessed with. It's right behind me. It's called The Other Black Girl. And it is basically Devil Wears Prada meets Stepford Wives with the Get Out political mentality. Like, it is one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read in my life. And by the end of it, I thought I would quit publishing because it's so visceral. It is like, it's anti-racist and all of that. And it's just, it's so timeless and yet so important for this time of day. And the thing is that I will send it to literally anybody who wants me to. You just tell me who you are and I'll send it to you. But the thing is that, like, one of the best parts of my job is that I get to read books like that all the time. And then I get to tell people like you to read them. Like, it's just so fun. I don't have a way to end this very long rant. So I'll just end by saying, read The Other Black Girl. Comes out June 1st.
I'll take it from you because I actually think that our jobs are pretty similar. So I'll talk a little bit, mostly kind of from the agent perspective, I think is what Amy wanted. So my job as an agent, I think Natalie said it's to play matchmaker. And I think that's a really good part of it, right? It's a really good explanation. Authors come to me, come to my agency and say, I have this phenomenal book, help me get it into the world. We then read all these books and say, this is the one I really care about. We take it and we try our darndest to get it published and to make it successful in the world. And a lot of that is reading that book, finding my enthusiasm for it, figuring out exactly who is going to be as enthusiastic about it and putting it in their hands. Then there's all of the kind of nitty gritty of it, which I happen to love, which is the contracts, the subsidiary rights, and managing their money. You know, an agent is an advocate for the author. So it doesn't stop at selling the book. We try to sell the book to publishers. Should we succeed? Wonderful. We are in the back corner making sure that everything goes right, making sure that those royalty statements look good, making sure that our authors get paid fairly, get paid more than the publishers want to give us for those books. Our job is to really, you know, be the professional in this situation where we're telling the authors how it works because we understand. But at the end of the day, it's their story. We're trying to make their stories happen. And we do that, you know, a lot of the same way a sales team does, by talking about how wonderful this book is, by putting it in the right hands, and then by making sure that, you know, everything is done by the book and to benefit the author.
Oh, sorry, Hannah, were you gonna?
You go. I'll go after you.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, so as an associate editor, I'm constantly in contact with literary agents because, you know, I'm the buyer. Like, I have like a certain, you know, quota to meet for my list, and I like need to be buying books to publish them, and so it's really it's really exciting that way. So a lot of what I do is networking with agents who have similar tastes as me, who represent authors who, you know, whose work could be a good match for me. And so then, so I'll get submissions in from agents. So a lot of my job is reading those submissions, but it doesn't usually happen during work hours. And I think that's something that I think this might be another one of your questions later down the line, Amy, but like one thing that I didn't realize going into publishing is just how much of your own personal time will be taken up by this job. And I think that's, it's not for the faint of heart that way. So you really have to love reading because you're going to be doing so much of it, and you're going to be, you know, like, I'll be done with work and then I'm like, okay, now it's we're done with work, like 9 to 5. And then I'm like, okay, now's my reading time because emails have slowed down in my inbox. So it's, yeah, it's definitely a passion driven job that way. And then, so if I'm not reading submissions or editing, I also edit the books, hence my job title. But that also is usually done like after like work hours or on the weekends, when I can kind of sit down and have the mental space to just flow through like, you know, a manuscript. So during the day, a lot of what takes up my time is really being an author's internal advocate. So as an editor, I oversee the publication process, and I'm constantly communicating with authors and agents kind of what's going on with the publication, what, the marketing publicity plans are, the cover process. It's definitely a very personal relationship driven job that way, where you're championing your author in-house, and you're constantly talking to the sales force and getting people excited about the books that you're publishing, because that enthusiasm originates it originates with the literary agent who gets the editor really excited, but then the editor's enthusiasm really has to carry that book through to the acquisition meeting, where if I fall in love with a project, I have to bring it forward to the people who hold the purse strings and will give me the green light to acquire a book for a certain amount of money. And sometimes that can result in auctions where I'm butting up against other passionate editors. And yeah, so there's never a dull moment, but I would say the bulk of my job is really championing authors in-house.
Casey, do you want to go next? Because maybe what you do might go off nicely from what Natalie just said.
I think I think I can go. I think I can go last. I think for production, I think it'll be. It's the end of the process anyway, so I'll go last.
Okay. So what I do, so subsidiary rights. This is a little bit of a nitty-gritty explanation, but just for those of you that don't know, when a book deal is made, there are many things that book deal could encompass, and I think most of the time it's sort of who has the right to print the book. This is a deal done between the agent on the author's behalf and the publishing house. What could also be included in that deal is who has the right to do the ebook, who has the right to make an audiobook, who has the right to potentially sell this to publishers in other countries, to translate it into other languages. And those things can get divided up in different ways. In my office, what I do is subsidiary rights means everything that's not a main right. So that includes translation, audio, UK rights. Sometimes it includes first or second serial. So that's when there are sort of excerpts of books that get printed in magazines, book club editions, condensation, Reader's Digest editions. There are lots of different ways that this can play out. On the agency side, what we mostly handle are translation and audio rights, occasionally UK. This is all stuff that gets negotiated between the main agent and the publisher when the deal is done. But when we have things left over, that's what we get to then turn around and sell to. I do a lot of translation work, so I don't actually translate the books myself, because that would mean I'd have to be fluent in everything, which I am not. But what I do is have personal relationships with, we have co-agents, so there's a person in every territory in the world that we work in, and that person helps us sort of liaison between foreign publishers and our office. I negotiate book deals in all of those territories, in all of those languages. I attend book fairs, so that's those happen 2 or 3 times a year. And at the book fair, that's when you get the opportunity to meet with foreign publishers face to face, which is really great. And it's a complicated thing to do during COVID. I know we'll probably circle back to this later, but having to meet with people in multiple time zones on Zoom has been a real trip. Yeah, and so and for audiobooks, that's, stuff that we mostly do domestically. So then you're working with, publishers in the US to sell the audio rights to. And it's a really interesting job, because you have to know so much about what else is happening in the world in order to be able to do this part well. We're experiencing this global pandemic. Everyone in the world is experiencing this right now, but in different ways. And so every time you have a publisher meeting, what's happening economically in Turkey is relevant to what's happening in publishing in Turkey. So I feel like I'm the eyes and ears for the world for my office. It's my job to relay that information back to them and to the authors, to explain, why an advance might be the level that it is, or anything like that. And I also have personal relationships with all the authors that my office has, and I do this for all the agents that my office has. So the volume of work is quite high, because there are 8 agents at my office. All of them represent dozens of authors who all have hundreds of titles, and then we do all those things in every language you can think of. So there's a lot going on, but it's really interesting. But I think somebody said before, it's like a part of publishing you might not know exists until you're in it. Like that, this is exactly one of those things. I think people don't realize all the extra like ways you could possibly enter this field. This is one of them.
I have another one. So I'm a production manager, and being in production is a very tangible part of the job, which is something I really love about it. You're basically responsible for creating the physical book, taking the text that the text designer created, taking the cover that the artist created, and that the whole team agreed upon, and then bringing that and making it a physical book. So in production, you work with a lot of different teams. Like I said, you're working with art, design, managing editorial, inventory. You kind of have to, the interpersonal skills are really important. Just being able to like speak everybody's language and understand what everybody needs, when they need it, how much time they need to do it in. Just kind of being that schedule master is a really big part, because hitting that on sale date is crucial.
Yeah, no, you save editors' lives like that.
That on sale date is non-negotiable.
Kids.
So you work a lot with, you're working a lot with everyone internally, and you're also working with the vendors who are printing and binding the books, who are printing the covers. And you're fielding queries from them. You know, you're supplying them with the text and cover files, and you know, they might have questions if they're running into issues with manufacturing. You gain a lot of knowledge as you go along as to just like how to troubleshoot these things. It's definitely, it's the kind of job where there isn't really a manual for every single situation. You get very good at problem solving, and just if you're not sure how to address something, you can just ask. Especially the vendors, they're so knowledgeable and they're so eager to share that knowledge with us, and they've been amazing partners, especially now. Which again, I know we're going to get back to COVID. It's at the top of the brain for all of us, I think, these days. But so I really love that tangible part of it. So that is one part of production, is when you are bringing the book, when the book is new and it's just coming out. I specifically work in reprints, which is the next production person down the line from that. So once, you know, the initial production person, you know, gets the book done, it goes on sale. When that book keeps going, if it keeps selling, reprints production, they stay with that book for the life of the book. You're the one who keeps placing the order with the vendor to, you know, keep those books coming in. I've worked on Where the Crawdads Sing. I've worked on The Vanishing Half. Atomic Habits is a big one right now. It's very intense. Especially when, you know, that New York Times bestseller list comes out, and, you know, it's very exciting. Your book is there, but as soon as it's there, it's like, hey, quick, we need these books. We need more of them, and we need them right now.
And that's usually my fault.
Yeah. Yes. Sales to inventory down to me.
Yep.
But it's so it's fast paced. But I think what's great about working in reprints is you get, the books kind of become your children. And I think we all kind of feel like this in different ways, but you manage so many of them that are, you know, continue to print and continue to do well. And it's always really interesting to see like the kind of books that pop, especially when it's for like a very strange reason. I worked on a book called Burn After Writing, which is, I know, it's an activity journal, and the premise is you can, you know, just put all your darkest secrets into it and then just burn it when you're done. And it blew up, and to this day, I still don't know that anyone is really sure. The theory was like that last season of Game of Thrones when Varys like burns the paper, like that's what people thought, but we weren't sure. But even this long afterward, it's still going. So you get to kind of be there. You're along for the ride, and you're responsible for getting those books in and keeping them in stock so that people can buy them.
Casey, that's actually just kind of thinking about your job and thinking about, we've all kind of shifted to remote these days. And I'm curious, for everybody, but if you want to start, Casey, just how your job has changed either permanently or temporarily due to COVID. And I'm curious, how do you guys see these changes affecting those trying to get into publishing now, whether it's on the author side or the getting into the industry as an editor, an agent, or sales,
Yeah, absolutely. It's very different. Like I said, a big part of my job is tangible, and I'm not seeing as many book samples these days. That's another part of the job. When we were in the office, you get a sample of every time a book prints, you get a sample and you review it for color quality to make sure that that book still looks as good as it did when that first printing came out. So it's been tough. We've been flying blind a little bit. Our primary vendor isn't able to send us book samples at the moment just because there's too many books and it was too much for them to be shipping samples out to all the production managers every printing. So we're kind of relying on if a customer review comes in or if an author gets a copy and they notice that there's an issue with it. It is not the way we prefer to do quality control, but that has been some of the ways that we have gotten some insight from that. It's really interesting. I'm trying to think about all the different facets. I feel like color management was such a big part of, especially with covers, just monitoring that from printer to printer or printing to printing. I don't interact with physical proofs anymore. And I think beyond the physical part, the biggest challenge right now is printer capacity. So at this point, the demand for books is so far beyond the available capacity in open book printers. Our corporate team got very creative in trying to source new binderies that we could use. And the thing about working in reprint production is you're managing a large list of books versus if you work in initials production, you manage a smaller list, but for a longer period of time because you're literally making the book what it is. But the way we're able to manage those long lists is that there are minimal changes. We make text and cover corrections as needed, which that's another interesting part. You get to see maybe a typo that slipped through or interesting change. The changes they make and the reasons behind them are always really interesting. But the way we're able to manage those long lists is that there aren't a ton of changes. You're resending an order to the same printer and, you can do it very quickly. Now we're bogged down a lot. By sourcing out to different printers, it's kind of a new book again. You are sending them the files, you are asking for a sample because you want to make sure that they get it right, because they don't know the history of the book. They just have the files that we give them. So that has been a challenge during COVID, is just the volume of work and how much we have to put into each title has really gone up a lot. So it's been tough. We've been kind of keeping together, getting through it, but it's been a lot.
Are we not gonna mention that Penguin Random House bought a printer?
Yeah, they just bought a printer.
You're like, we're having a hard time finding space in the printer, and I'm like, you mean your printer?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The meetings, the internal meetings about that are very strange. It's like, this is our printer, and yeah, it's really crazy to see such a big house like Penguin Random House struggling to find capacity and having the resources that they have to pull out all the stops and buy a printer. And it's been a wild year. I'll say that.
It'll be a wild 2021 too at Penguin Random Simon Schuster House.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Do you want to talk about that, Leora?
I will just say that my nickname for it is herpes, because if you mix around the letters of Simon Schuster Random Penguin House, you get herpes.
Oh my
No, I think when I first started in publishing, it was a big 6. Back in the 1950s, it was like a small 25. So I think publishing changes as it will. I think that a lot of the fears that authors and the Author Guild has are both founded and a little bit premature. Because I think for sure, anytime you get a bigger house, you get less negotiating power. But I also think that if you look at the Penguin Random House merger, it didn't end up being that much bigger than Penguin or Random House separately. So I didn't mean to, start a whole new thing. I just thought it was funny.
Do you want to talk while you have the mic? Do you want to talk about a little bit if COVID's changed anything on your end?
I was thinking about this as Casey was talking. I don't have a whole lot of things that have changed. I know that agenting and editorial has changed so much more, so I do want to give you guys the time. The only thing that's really changed is that instead of me being able to be face to face and say how much I love a book and kind of shove it in their face, I have to be more creative about how I do it on Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to just talk quickly about, how it's changed for editorial, because and just people getting into the industry in general, because, when I was getting into the industry, I mentioned this, really briefly, but like that proximity to New York was key. And I think this is such a horrendous time, but my hope is that one of the silver linings is that will become more flexible, because I think that's a real barrier for people getting into the industry, because New York is one of the most expensive cities in the entire world. And publishing is a notoriously low-paying industry, especially for people trying to get in at the entry level. So I think my hope is that this flexibility will continue. It will be less New York-centric, because I think that's going to open things up to just a whole wide range of people who we frankly need in this industry.
From the agent side, personally, I'll say I work for quite a small agency. There's just 3 of us agents there. And because we're smaller, we don't have a ton of structures in place for working from home, for, all of our online systems. So a lot of last year from my end was bringing all of our systems up into the 21st century and making sure that we had the capacity to work from home.
Oh, no.
I know. So and the challenges I face are the challenges of a lot of small businesses all over the country. I had the same problems that, most people who work in an office of 4 people suddenly had. So kind of from that end, that was a fun little challenge. But from kind of the macro level, book buying has changed from the editorial side. Very early on, we were told, we're not buying nearly as much. We're really crunching here. The way sales payment structures changed quite a little bit. So we had kind of a new set of challenges that we had to face when selling our clients' projects, but it's kind of evened out. Publishing is changing so rapidly. You kind of always have to figure it out from some way, So what we did was we kind of recalibrated how am I selling books? How am I meeting editors? I can't take anyone out for lunch. I have to meet them online. It was just a lot of little challenges and changes like that. But overall, it's running pretty smoothly, almost a year out. So that's been pretty interesting. We're relying so much less on our physical office space, which as someone with an hour commute into her job likes a lot.
For translation specifically, this has been quite an interesting thing, because at first, when COVID sort of first hit between, I'd say like March and May, it seemed as though foreign publishing sort of shut down entirely. I don't know if that is actually true, but that was certainly the impression that we all got, because everybody was just trying to sort of deal with their immediate crises in their immediate territories. Then things sort of picked up a little bit. Publishing houses opened again. In Israel, they've been like pretty much closed this entire pandemic. Like our poor co-agent has been furloughed almost this whole time since March, just because they cannot get their feet under them. But I mean, everyone's coping with this differently, but we sort of saw similar trends. Like the US, people suddenly found themselves with lots of time at home to read. So then suddenly interest spiked in books. That was like a thing people could still do. So though publishing had not really happened for a couple of months, suddenly sales were doing pretty well. So in the end, by the time we sort of met via Zoom with people for the Frankfurt Book Fair, which was in October into November, they kept saying like, actually our year is doing pretty well overall, but because they delayed so many publications because they were closed between March and May, this caused a huge like congestion period for the fall, for the winter, for the spring, where suddenly, before if they were only supposed to publish 10 books, now they were trying to publish 45 books. That number is made up, but there was just too much happening at once. And it's detrimental to those books and to the industry if too many things publish at once, because then nothing sells as well. People's interest sort of gets spread too thin. So because all of the pub schedules got condensed and congested, they then pushed things even further back. And this means that now the rate that people are acquiring things has slowed down a lot. So we are sending things to foreign publishers and they are interested, but they can't buy them, or they can, but they have to wait until further out than we expected, or they can buy them and they can publish them now, but they can only pay you a lot less because actually the dollar exchange rate in Russia has significantly tanked. So there are all these factors that we have to take into account. And when we had the book fair, which I've mentioned a couple times, I guess I can explain a little bit more in detail. It's like a big sales conference, basically. Again, it normally happens face-to-face. It only happens 2 or 3 times a year. So this is the only opportunity that the people who are me all over the place actually get to see their colleagues in person. We did not get that this year. It was not at all complicated to do it via Zoom. And everyone kept saying like, thank goodness we even have Zoom, because if this had happened 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had the technology in place to do anything at all. But again, with the time zones, it made it a little complicated. Normally the book fair lasts for like a week in October. Because of the time zones that everybody was in, the meetings had to get spread out. So the fair lasted for about 6 weeks, which meant that like any regular work just did not really happen because we couldn't do the regular work and the fair work. So it's had effects on things, but it's fine.
We crammed our meetings in.
See, we should have done that.
The fair was still a week for me. I was just on Zoom from like 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. 4 days.
People wouldn't do it. We should have done that. And now we're having all kinds of debates about what to do for London, and
we should talk.
We'll talk. We'll chat.
Well, actually, sorry. Go ahead, Leora.
I just want to say something super quick. So, something Hannah said that was really interesting is that everyone pushed their books out, right? So, if you want to see something wild, look up the most anticipated books of 2021. It is every single famous author you've ever heard of that is alive, and they are publishing in 2021. And I guarantee you, everyone has not released all of their books yet. So like 2021 is just going to be hit after hit after hit, and none of them are going to be bestsellers.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
You'll have less reprints to do.
I know, it's true. Amanda, I'm going to bounce over to you for the Q&A part. I know we are wrapping up in about a half hour, so we wanted to make sure people had time for questions. So Amanda, if you want to go ahead and lead the charge on that Q&A.
Sure. So we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. If we don't get to everybody, go ahead and try to follow up with you after the event. But if you have questions, please keep them coming in the chat. And we're going to start with, do you all have suggestions for people who may be hoping to make connections or break into the industry during the pandemic / virtual times?
Yeah, I can just kick us off. I think it depends on which area you're interested in, but if it's, I can just speak from an editorial perspective, but look at the books that you love. And I suggest looking at the acknowledgement section, because almost always authors will thank their agents and their editors. And that's a really good way to kind of form a connection with someone in the industry, is kind of just like writing a fan letter in a way and say like, I love your list. I love this book that you published. It had like a tremendous effect on me. And could, if you ever have the availability, I'd love just to, maybe set up like a quick informational interview and just kind of get a sense of what you do day to day or anything like that. Because I think, I've mentioned this before, but it really is a passion-driven industry. So kind of starting with that passion and what books you love the most and reaching out to those people or people who publish similar books and trying to form connections that way, I think is a good starting point, especially during the pandemic, because that's just something you can do virtually. And meeting someone like for a virtual coffee or something like that is very, or like a phone call is pretty low stakes.
And to jump off that, I think you now have, a group of 5 of us, and we all work in the industry. And if you want to talk to, I'm gonna just make sure everyone know. But if you want to talk to me, like, go ahead and email me. If you want to talk to someone in sales or marketing, and you don't want to talk to me, you can still email me and ask me for a name. But also something that my friend, who was the best networker I've ever met in my life, and I met him at Geneseo, so salute Geneseo. He just changed industries during the pandemic, and he did it all on LinkedIn. And I was like, LinkedIn isn't anything. Nah, he knew how to do it. So what you do is you just like look up somebody in the company, and then you find a whole mess of people who work at that company, and you just start hitting them up for informational interviews. And honestly, I don't know anybody who would say no to giving you an informational interview. I don't know one person. And then my last thing is going to be not the first time, but definitely, or the first time, but not the last time I'm going to plug it. Look up the publishing courses. This is if you want to go into the industry. I did the Columbia Publishing course having done nothing to do with English or literature or anything of the sort. And it helped me create so many connections and get so much know-how so quickly that I was able to get into the industry within a year. They have them virtually during the pandemic. I know at least the Columbia Publishing course does. I'm sure that NYU's course does as well. But look them up. I think the deadline for applying is actually coming up in a couple of weeks. So look them up tonight. But also you can email me if you have any questions about the courses as well.
And Leora, just to piggyback on what you just said, another one of our questions was, for those who may have spent the past few years in industries that aren't related to publishing, are there work, classes, opportunities that people should be taking advantage of before they try to get into the industries? Or are there other things you would recommend?
Yeah, so I really didn't know what I was doing when I was leaving theater. I had no marketable skills, as they say. But the thing is that I got a lot of really good advice from a lot of people. Internships are always good to have. They can be hard to get. So what I've always heard is if you are having a hard time getting into the industry, get a job at a bookstore. A bookstore on a resume will give you so much cred. Not to mention, you also usually get to read some of the books behind the scenes, which means you get to stay on top of the trends. Another interesting thing, especially if you're going into production, which Casey, please back me up if I'm right, go try for a waitressing job. Try for anything where you have to like triple task and you have to have a really good sense of detail orientation. And also you're just really good at running around. Because I know people who have actually been like, I will hire people who have wait skills on their resumes. Like publishing is a pretty easy office job. Any person or well-trained cat can do it. So honestly, as long as you have some sort of as affability, as long as you become a problem solver, you will succeed in this industry. So just find ways to make sure that that is on your resume in some way.
Yeah, and if you can write a good email, I think that's like another crucial skill. I spend like all of my time writing good emails.
Yeah.
Which I may have learned as an English major, but I may not have. Like, you know, that's a skill you can pick up sort of in a lot of different industries.
Yes.
Another weird little tip that I have is read trade magazines. Publishers Weekly is the biggest one in the industry. if you just, go online, browse around a lot, and just read and learn as much as you can about what the hell is going on, and then use that to ask questions of the people that you have been connected to. So something that I did with my boss was I would read things before, while I was still in school. I'd send him articles and I'd say, can you explain what this means and why it seems to be so important? And there's nothing that people in publishing like to talk about more than like crazy things happening in publishing. We're going to want to talk about it. So my fiance is over there and he's just like nodding along. So essentially just, talk to us about what we read all day. That's a great thing. I think you can read a lot of the articles for free. It might even be worth, a $5 subscription a month or two.
And there's a free newsletter for Publishers Lunch and Shelf Awareness. Mm-hmm. And those are, and Shelf Awareness has like a million different kinds. There's ones for readers, there's maximum Shelf Awareness. And I used to go to interviews reading Shelf Awareness. You're absolutely right, Bibi. And I used to like show up to the interview being like, I heard that this Southern bookseller just sold it. And they'd be like, okay, you're applying for an assistant job, but like, good on you for the passion. Like, so you're right. Like it's, and also all of those newsletters have job postings on the bottom.
They do, yeah.
I was going to also say, if you're someone, I'm not sure if there's anybody here who's coming from this place, but if you're coming from the position of you're in a different industry and you want to work with books and you're not really sure where to start or what would be right for you, just kind of like look at those job listings on PubLunch, or, just go directly to the website of, any publisher and see what's available. There are a lot of, and I feel like I learned this getting into production, there are a lot of creative adjacent roles. It really does take a village to make these books happen. And there is something in there that you like, just reading those job descriptions, like there's a lot in there that people are qualified for that I don't think you would ever realize just from the job title or just publishing in general. It's very possible there's like something there for you.
1000%. Oh, and yeah. Sorry, it reminded me of one quick thing, which is that I think a huge myth is that what you start in publishing is what you're going to have to do forever. But as you can tell by this panel, very few of us are where we started. If you want to be an editor, you still can, don't do this as a rule, but like if you think you really want to be an editor, don't count out going for a marketing assistant, sales assistant, publicity assistant, production assistant, because as an assistant, you learn very essential skills in publishing and you get to know these people in the industry and you can start figuring out what you really want to do.
Absolutely. And I'll even build off of that because I started as that hybrid sub-rights editorial assistant job. And I use my subsidiary rights skills every single day. And I know exactly what rights I'm trying to acquire from an agent. And, I'm surprised at some editors who don't know like exactly what those rights represent. And then also scouting, literary scouts, which is an aspect of the industry I had no idea about going into it until I was in subsidiary rights. And scouts really keep their ear to the ground on behalf of foreign publishers to kind of basically like keep their pulse on the industry, keep their finger on the pulse of the industry of what's hot, what submissions are selling to U.S. publishers, and then scouts report back to their foreign publisher clients with kind of like, okay, here's everything that's selling for a lot of money. Here's what I think about it. Hannah, maybe you know more than I do, but yeah, I still talk to literary scouts as an editor because they really like knowing what's hot in the industry is also useful for editors to know too.
I don't mean this in a mean way. Scouts are a little gossipy, but that's like their job. Like they're supposed to do that because they are supposed to hear about things before other people and then report that information back. So we work with them all the time. I also did not know what they were until I had to, work with them, but they are really helpful. Recently we had a situation where one of our agents wanted to work in a genre that we don't usually work in. And we, didn't have any other agents in my office who like could answer her questions. So we contacted a scout who we knew, and she was able to like have a meeting with us and just sort of explain to us like, these kinds of publishers often look for the thing you're talking about. Like they're nice. They have a lot of like institutional knowledge about what else is happening right now. So they are really good resources. And I think, I mean, as a scout, you end up, reading a bunch of different things for your clients. It's, again, a personal relationship driven job. So like everything else that we've all been talking about, you have to just, be able to make connections and be friendly and stay on top of stuff, and, not be afraid to sort of nudge people and say, hey, I heard a rumor that there's a really cool book coming from your office. Can you tell me about it? So, yeah.
Great advice. And I think just to pivot a little, someone is asking, how can they get the attention of an agent/publishing house?
Just in terms of the publishing house, literary agents do that for you. I mean, if that's kind of like my biggest piece of advice is definitely try to get a literary agent, because they really will manage your career and really be your biggest advocate. So yeah, and a lot of publishing houses actually don't consider unagented manuscripts. So that's something to look at as well. A lot of imprints and publishing houses will say on their website whether they'll consider unagented manuscripts or not. And for me personally at Park Row, we do not. We only consider agented manuscripts.
So from the agent side, the way to get a literary agent is to submit your work to them. All agents will have the guidelines that we ask for you to submit your work. All agencies will also list who they are, what they sell. You're going to want to find an agency that represents the genre that you're writing in, that represents similar books as yours. If you write business nonfiction, you're not going to go to a children's book agent and say, here's my book, because they don't work in that kind of an industry. So the way to find agents, someone mentioned, look in the back of acknowledgments. This is also a really good tip for if you're looking for an agent. Find a book that you think yours would sit next to on a bookshelf, right? In the staff pick section, when you're looking at a bookstore, what would your book be put with? Look in the back of those books, see who that agent is, and submit to them. Publishers Marketplace, which sounds a lot like Publishers Weekly, but is a different company, is an online database, which is a fantastic tool for writers. It's an industry monster of an Excel program that lists all of the agents, what they've sold, who they've sold it to, what foreign territories it's been sold in. It has all the publishers listed. It's a big matrix. It's really interesting and a little bit overwhelming. I really suggest, if you are querying, to try a sample of it, get a short membership and find out as much information as you can. Search those titles that you think your book is like, find out who the agent is, and, send them your stuff. You'll find lists of, they call them top deal makers in certain genres. That just means most reported sales. It's not always the best way of finding them, because some agents don't always report all their sales. Most deals is not always indicative of best deals. There's a whole language to learn, but it's a really great resource to kind of dive into and look. But the best way to find an agent is to make sure your work is as good as it possibly can be, and to send it to who you think would connect to it the most. I hope that was helpful.
Sounds helpful to me. Can you tell us, are there agent fees an author might expect?
Yes, I can. Do not sign with an agent who wants you to pay ahead of time. Do not sign with an agent who wants you to pay ahead of time. I'm going to say it twice because it's very important. Legitimate agents work off of commission. Standard commission in the industry at the moment is 15%. If anyone is asking for significantly more than that, that would be a red flag to me that maybe that's not someone I want to work with. Don't submit to people who have reading fees. That suggests to me they just want to take your money and run away. Look up reputable agents. They're not going to charge you ahead of time. We always work off commission.
Solid advice. And I think maybe we'll wrap up with this question. I know there are a few more, but in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and follow up with folks on those separately. They're pretty specific questions. But this one is, I broke into publishing articles and then books in the 1970s using the annual Writers Market books. Are these publications still valuable?
Never heard of them.
There are quite a few that are still around and still publishing actively. I'm trying to rack my brain and forgetting. Writer's Digest is a magazine that does a lot of interviews and stuff like that. There are definitely publications that still do this. I, however, would not use that same book you bought in the 70s, because likely a lot of those agencies are dissolved or the agents have moved on. Some might still be in business. You know, we do have a lot of legacy agencies, but try to get as up-to-date information as you can.
I will make the point, and that's the question. Writers Market publishes every year. The 20.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, the 2021, and it's
Oh, great.
And before the internet, that's how I started. So,
Poets
That's
and
a great
writers.
point. Yeah, if it's still publishing, just make sure you get one in the past year, 2, 3, even probably is still great. But yeah, those are still resources you can use.
And Bibi, piggybacking off that, I know Poets and Writers, I think, does like an annual agents. Maybe it's just once a year, twice a year. They do like an agent showcase.
And Poets and Writers also published a book on how to get your book published. So look it up. The Simon & Schuster book. So there's another plug for you. Mwahaha!
And did someone already mention Writer's Digest? Because they do like new agent alerts too.
There's a lot of information out there. It's just a matter of finding it and sifting through it.
The internet is your best friend.
Do love the internet. All right, everybody. We just want to thank you again so much for joining us tonight. And thank you so much to our wonderful panel and to our moderator, Amy, for bringing everybody together and for sharing such wonderful advice with us. I don't know about everybody else, but I certainly learned a lot. And we will follow up shortly with an email to everyone with the recording of the event. And if there are other question follow-ups or anything to do, we'll take care of that as well.
Thank you all for joining us. Hannah, Bibi, Casey, Natalie, Leora, thank you guys so much for being part of this. I appreciate all of you. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. You're
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was fun. Be
Thanks,
well, everyone.
guys.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
Bye.